The night of my senior prom was supposed to be perfect. My best friends, Lila and Jess, and I had spent months planning every detail, from our dresses to our makeup, even down to the playlist we'd blast in the limo. It was the culmination of 4 years of high school drama, laughter, and heartbreak, and we wanted to savor every moment. But now, as I sit here recounting the events of that night, the memory chills me to my core. I wonder if I'll ever feel safe again. It all started with the dress, a sleek, crimson gown that hugged my curves and made me feel invincible. "You're going to knock them dead," Jess had said when I stepped out of the fitting room. I laughed, not knowing how prophetic her words would feel later. Looking back, I remember the boutique owner's odd expression when she saw me in the dress, a fleeting shadow of concern that I brushed off as nothing. The evening began like any other prom night. Lila, Jess, and I posed for pictures in front of my parents' house, our corsages perfectly pinned. The limo arrived, and we squealed with excitement, piling in alongside a few other friends. The air was electric, filled with the promise of an unforgettable night. The venue, a sprawling banquet hall on the outskirts of town, was decked out in twinkling fairy lights and shimmering gold accents. It was magical. But then I saw him. He was standing near the entrance, a man in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing a black suit that looked almost too formal for the occasion. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. At first, I thought he might be a chaperone or a parent dropping off his kid. But something about the way he lingered, his eyes fixed on me, made my stomach churn. "Hey, who's that?" I whispered to Lila, nodding subtly in his direction. She followed my gaze and shrugged. "Probably just a teacher or something. Come on, let's dance." I tried to shake it off. After all, it was my prom night. I wasn't going to let some random guy ruin it. The music was loud, the lights were dazzling, and for a while, I let myself get lost in the joy of the moment. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of him standing in the shadows, always watching. As the night wore on, the unease gnawed at me. I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief from the stuffy dance floor. I leaned against the railing of the balcony, trying to calm my racing thoughts. That's when I heard footsteps. "Great night, isn't it?" a voice said, low and smooth. I turned sharply to see him standing there, closer than I expected. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I couldn't move. Yeah, I managed to stammer. "Are you here with someone?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just observing. You looked like you could use some company." My skin crawled. "I'm fine, thanks." I turned to leave, but his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. His grip was cold, like ice. "You should be careful," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not safe to be alone tonight." I yanked my arm free and hurried back inside, my heart pounding. I told Lila and Jess what had happened, but they brushed it off as just some creepy guy. "He's probably harmless," Jess said. "Don't let him ruin your night." But the rest of the evening felt tainted. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him lurking in the shadows. By the time the prom ended, I was desperate to go home. Lila and Jess convinced me to join them for the after-party at a classmate's house, promising it would take my mind off things. The party was loud and chaotic, a blur of music and laughter. For a while, I felt like I could breathe again. But then, as I was heading to the kitchen for a drink, I saw him. He was standing just outside the sliding glass door, his face illuminated by the moonlight. I froze, my blood turning to ice. How did he find me here? "Lila," I hissed, grabbing her arm. "He's here, the guy from prom." She frowned, following my gaze. But when she looked outside, he was gone. "Maybe you're just imagining things," she said gently. "You've had a lot to drink." But I knew what I'd seen, and as the night wore on, I began to feel like I was being hunted. Every shadow seemed to hold his figure. Every sound made me jump. By the time I convinced Lila to take me home, I was a trembling mess. When I got to my house, I locked every door and window, double-checking each one. My parents were out of town for the weekend, and the silence of the empty house was deafening. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, but sleep wouldn't come. Around 3 a.m. I heard it. The faint sound of footsteps outside my window. My heart stopped. Slowly, I got out of bed and peeked through the blinds. There he was, standing in the yard, his face tilted up toward my window. His eyes glinted in the darkness, and a twisted smile spread across his face. I stumbled back, grabbing my phone and calling 911. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline as I explained what was happening. She told me to stay on the line and wait for the police, but then the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. I could hear him now, the sound of his footsteps moving around the house. I crouched in the corner of my room, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The operator's voice crackled in my ear, reassuring me that help was on the way. Minutes felt like hours. Then I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. He was inside. The rest of the night is a blur. The police arrived just in time to catch him trying to break into my room. They told me later that he had a history of stalking and violence, and that I was lucky to be alive. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching, waiting for the moment when I let my guard down. Prom night was supposed to be a celebration, a memory I'd cherish forever. Instead, it became a nightmare I can't escape. And every time I close my eyes, I see his face, that twisted smile, and the promise it held. When I was a sophomore, this happened. One of those nights that stick with you, no matter how much you try to forget. Our town was a deadbeat little place, so Friday nights were all about football games. That fall, our team was actually doing well, so the whole school would show up to cheer. My friends Matt, Jenna, and I had made plans to meet at the game. Matt swung by to pick me up, and then we grabbed Jenna. Matt had just gotten his driver's license and was proud to be the one driving us around. Jenna looked excited, her usual nervous energy bubbling as she joked about the team's chances that night. We got to the school's back lot near the woods and parked. Some kids had already started sneaking drinks in the lot, but we decided to wait. The sun was setting as we walked to the bleachers and grabbed spots near the top row. The game started strong, but by halftime, our team was falling apart. Jenna was scrolling on her phone while Matt and I were just cracking jokes to pass the time. By the fourth quarter, it was dark and the crowd was thinning. The bleachers creaked as people trickled away, muttering about another bad game. We stuck around, though, partly because we had nothing better to do, and partly because Matt had this wild idea to explore the woods after the game. When the final whistle blew and our team quietly left the field, we headed to the parking lot. Matt, with his ever-curious and adventurous nature, brought up a rumor he had heard. The woods near the football field were said to be the site of mysterious happenings. "We're never going to get a chance like this again," Matt said excitedly. "Let's just explore a bit and come right back." Matt grabbed a flashlight from his car and waved it theatrically, as if leading an expedition. Jenna hesitated, but her curiosity got the better of her. The fence near the woods had a hole in it where kids often snuck through. We ducked under and began walking along the narrow path leading into the forest. The forest were quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the faint hum of the football field's lights shutting off in the distance. Matt, being Matt, kept making dumb jokes, but I could tell Jenna was uneasy. The flashlight beam bounced off the trunks, casting long, shifting shadows. It felt like the trees were closing in on us. Then we heard it, a soft humming, like someone singing just out of earshot. We all froze. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered, clutching my arm. Matt swung the flashlight around, but there was nothing, just the endless rows of trees. "Probably just the wind," he said, though his voice didn't sound as confident as usual. We kept walking, slower now. The humming grew louder, shifting into what sounded like a faint, eerie melody. My chest tightened as the air around us seemed heavier. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and died. Jenna gasped and Matt cursed under his breath, smacking the flashlight to get it working again. When it finally flickered back on, we saw her. Standing about 20 feet away, half hidden behind a tree, was a woman. Her hair was wild, her clothes tattered, and her face, I can't even describe it. It was blurred, like looking through warped glass. She was staring right at us, but her eyes seemed wrong. Too big, too dark. She didn't move, just stood there humming that awful tune. "Who's there?" Matt called out, his voice shaking. The woman Jen tilted her head, still humming. Then she started moving, not walking but gliding, like her feet weren't touching the ground. Jenna screamed, and we all bolted. I could hear the humming behind us, growing louder and more distorted. My legs felt like lead, but fear pushed me forward. We finally broke through the trees and scrambled back to the parking lot. Matt fumbled with his keys, dropping them twice before getting the car unlocked. As we piled in, I looked back. The woods were dark and silent, but I could feel her eyes on us. We sped away, not saying a word until we were back at Matt's house. Jenna was shaking, her face pale. "What was that?" she kept asking, over and over. None of us had an answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Before heading to bed, I thought about the way Matt had acted in the woods, his jokes, his bravery. But now, he was as shaken as the rest of us. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, or what should have been her face. I don't know who she was or what she wanted, but I've never set foot in those woods again. And sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet, I swear I can still hear that humming. Even now, years later, I've never told anyone else about that night. Matt and Jenna don't talk about it either. It's like we made a silent pact to bury it. But I still wonder, who was she? And why was she waiting for us in the woods that night?